Hey mathematics learners, welcome to Distance Learning with Lee, where I make learning mathematics super easy. So on today's video tutorial, we are going to be analyzing a root map, okay? In particular, we're going to be looking at a marathon route map, okay? So this map basically shows, the route, the way, the course that will be taken by the participants of this marathon, okay? And we're going to basically use this route map to help us answer questions that are given to us. Okay, what's very important, right, when analyzing any kind of a map, whether it's a strip chart, whether it's a route map, regional map, provincial map, any of the maps that we've basically analyzed together, is that before you even have a look at the questions, right, look at the map, right, and see what is actually given, to you, on this map, right? So you can see that on this map, right, we're given key features, okay, things that are very important that we need to use to help us answer questions, okay? They are telling us, or they're giving us very specific information about what's happening on this map, right? You can see here we are given a key, right? And with this key, it's giving us what all these different symbols that we're seeing on this map mean. Okay, so we see that, okay, we've got an arrow, the glass of water, the Coke, the cross there, the lightning symbol, the banana, the P, right? We are basically told what all of these symbols mean on the map, right? So if we're seeing that arrow, it just means it's a marathon route, okay? Okay, when we're seeing a glass of water, it's the water station. When we're seeing the Coke bottle, it's the Coke station. When we see that red cross, it's the medical station. When we see that lightning, it's the energy drink station. When we see that banana, it's the banana station. And when you see the P, it's the personal supply station. And when we see an H on this map, it basically means that this is the height above sea level, right? So it's very important that we read that key before we even go to the questions and attempt to answer them, right? Another thing that's very important that we need to look out for when we're analyzing any type of map, we need to check, does that map have a scale? Okay, does it have a scale that's given, right? Does this map have a compass? Okay, does this map have a compass, right? Because that information is going to help us, right, when we're answering questions. So we can see here we're not given any scale because a scale is irrelevant when it comes to a route map, right, of this nature. Okay, but we are given a compass there. So obviously, if we're given a compass, it basically means that here you need to ask yourself, what is this compass telling me? Okay, so in this case, right, it's telling us that the north is upwards. So I always just advise my students that just write, fill in, okay? So you need to fill in the other cardinal points. So obviously, if we're told that, north is upwards, what does that mean, okay? If that is our north, right, fill in the other cardinal points, okay? Remember, you need to fill them in moving in a clockwise direction. So in naughty elephant sprays water. So fill in the other cardinal points because that information is going to come in very handy, probably, most definitely, when it comes to the questions that are going to be given to us, right? So analyze that, right? So give yourself at least like 5 minutes to just have an idea of what's happening there. What's happening, right? We've got that point there. So that's basically telling us that, at the starting point, right, we given that age of 1,400 meters. So that basically means that at that point, the height above sea level is 1,400 meters, right? Then you continue along this route. Then we see that we're given a particular water and cokes. You've got a water and coke station there, right? Then you're continuing. Then you're seeing that, okay, from the start point to this point, right, we've basically traveled, right, 5 kilometers, or the participants have ran 5 kilometers, right? And at that point, the height above sea level is 1,565. So we can see that from there to there, the height above sea level has basically increased, right? So that's supposed to, stimulate something in your mind about the steep of, this route. That means that it's increasing. The steep, it's very like it's steep, right? Because we started at 1,400 meters, but then at this point it's 1,500. From that point to that point, that means that, the as you're basically moving along this route, it's getting a bit, steeper, right? So you need to think about those, right? So we continuing along this route, then we see that at this point we've traveled 10 kilometers, right? Because the D is 10 kilometers. And now the height above sea level at that point now is 1,708. So do you see that it's like getting a bit steeper, 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 right? And then they're telling us that here it's the marathon turning point, the Handclip viewpoint, right? So then they turn, they move along this distance, right? And then they continue to move. We're following these arrows because these arrows are basically telling us this is the marathon route. Okay, so we are continuing. That's another station where you can get your water, your Coke, your banana, your personal supplies, and medical station. Then we are continuing. At this point now, what are we seeing? That okay, at this point, right, the runners or the participants have now basically ran 20 kilometers. We are given that now the height above sea level is 1,166. So now if you're comparing it with the height above sea level at the start and at this point, so now we can see that now, okay, it's getting a bit, okay, so at that point we can see that now the slope, right, is not steep anymore, but it's decreasing in slope, right? So it's a bit easier to run here because it's a decreasing slope, right? And we continuing given the different heights above sea level. Okay, we're following that arrow because that's the route that they're gonna take. Returning with that arrow. Okay, continuing at that arrow. At that point, the distance is 35 kilometers. At that, it's 40 kilometers, and then that's the finish line. All right. So give yourself some time to just analyze what's happening there, right? Also, we given some very important information there. We given cut off, right? We given cut off number 3 there at that point where the height above sea level is 1,400. We given cut off number 2 there at that point, right? We given cut off number 1 at that point there. Okay, so at this point you probably all don't know what is a cut off, right? So you will probably given information. If you don't know what something is, right, they'll probably give you information on what do they mean by cut off 1, cut off 2, cut off 3. Okay, but at this point now we've basically analyzed this route map. We kind of have an idea of what's happening. We saw that we've got a compass. We've filled in our cardinal points there so that we know if we ask for general direction and things like that, we know how to answer that question. We are fine with what the key or the different symbols on the map mean. So now we can go and have a look at the questions that are given to us, right? So before we basically, look at the questions, they're telling us that this is the Big Five, 42 kilometers full marathon map. Okay, so if that is 40 kilometers, so that means that from that point to the finish line is just an additional 2 kilometers. Okay, so it's something that you can just think about. Okay, so it says that the Big Five marathon is an event or an annual event in South Africa. It can be run as a full 42 kilometer marathon or as a half marathon of 21 kilometers. All right. The race has specific cut-off times. Okay. Certain compulsory distances to be covered within specific time. So now, right, we have an idea of what these cut off 2, cut off 1, cut off 3 mean. Now, it basically means that these are cut off times, which is that, at a particular time, you should have ran this amount of or this particular distance at this time, right? Okay, runners who do not meet the cutoff times are forced to withdraw from the race. So if you don't run Let's say, for example, the cutoff time for cutoff number one is that maybe at this point, they give you like an hour to get to that point, right? And you don't reach that point in an hour, then they cut you off. Okay, that basically means that you can't continue on, with the marathon because you haven't met the requirement when it comes to the time that you must be at that point. Okay, cool stuff. Right, and then below are the cutoff times for the full marathon. So if you want to basically partake in the full marathon, the 42 kilometers, they're telling that the distance from the start, okay, cutoff number one is just 25 kilometers. So it's 25 kilometers for you to from the start to get to that point. It's just 25.5 kilometers. Cut off number two, it's 31.5 kilometers. So from the start to cut off number two, which is that point, they're basically telling us that it's 31.5 kilometers. And then cut off number three is the finish line, which is 42 kilometers. Time from the start. So they're basically telling us that you need to reach cut off number one in 4 hours 15 minutes from the start of the marathon. Okay, so if you're not at that point, so they time it, right? If you're not cut off number one in 4 hours and 15 minutes from the start, okay, that means that you get cut off, right? Cut off number two, if you don't reach cut off number two in 5 hours 15 minutes, they cut you off. You cannot continue running in the marathon. Cut off number three, it's 7 hours, right? So you need to reach the finish line in 7 hours from the start of the race. So that's basically what is happening there. Okay, so now we basically have a full understanding of what is really happening in this marathon route map, and I think we're more than ready now to have a look at the questions that are given to us. It says use the information above and the next year to answer the questions that follow. I think at this point we all know when it comes to probability, you just need to be comfortable, when it comes to, in general, how do we calculate the likelihood of something happening, the probability of something happening, all right? At this point, you all should be able to, calculate probability because we know that they throw in these probability questions in most of these questions. So if you can't calculate probability, you're going to be losing 3 marks, 2 marks, as you basically going through your past papers, or your question paper, and we know that these 2 marks are very important. So question 3.1 says, determine as a decimal fraction the probability of a runner of the Big Five Marathon route accessing a refreshment station that offers only Coke and water, right? So at this point, we already know how we calculate probability. Probability is equal to the favorable outcomes, right, divided by the total outcomes, okay? So what are the favorable outcomes? Remember, the favorable outcomes are what the question is asking for. Okay, what the question is asking for. So in this case, right, the question is asking us to determine the probability, okay, that a runner, the question is asking us to determine the probability of a runner of the Big Five Marathon route accessing a refreshment station that only offers Coke and water. So that is the favorable outcomes. We want to look for the refreshment stations or all the points where they are just offering Coke and water, nothing else. Those are the favorable outcomes, right? Divided by total outcomes. How many refreshment stations are there? Okay, so that is basically how we're going to go about calculating this probability. Okay, so probability, okay, so the favorable outcomes is basically the runners accessing the refreshment stations that only offer Coke and water. So we're just going to count those. So it's just going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it's 4 over the total outcomes is how many refreshment stations are there, right? So we're going to count those. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's a total of 9 refreshment stations. Okay, remember they asked for us to give the probability as a decimal fraction. Okay, so 9 or 4 over 9, we need to obviously write this as a decimal, which is 0.44. Okay, if you round it off to 2 decimal places. Okay, so okay, because we know what's happening, in our route map, we can basically answer that question easily. Question 3.4. Question 3.2. Question 3.2 says, give the general direction in which a marathon runner is heading when passing the 20-kilometer mark, right? So when a marathon runner is passing the 20-kilometer marathon run, in which general direction are they heading? So at this point, if you've been watching all my video tutorials where we've been analyzing maps, you should know what is expected from you here, the answer that is expected from you here. So all that we need to do here, we just need to find out where is that 20 kilometer mark, and then from there we just need to then determine the general direction. So the 20-kilometer mark is this part there, so I'm sure you can see that. So in which direction is a runner heading after passing that mark? So after passing that mark, okay, we can see that, okay, the runner, if we just being direct in terms of in which direction are they heading right after passing that mark, okay, we can see that if you were to just draw the compass at that point, right? So let's just draw our compass at that point. Remember, you can just also do this to help you determine the general direction. Okay, so do you see that a person just after passing that point, they're actually moving in which direction? Just after passing that 20-kilometer mark, they're actually moving in the southeast direction. Okay, just after. So I'm just being direct. Just after. Okay, immediately after passing that point, in which direction are they heading? They're moving in the southeast direction. Okay. Question 3.3. Consider the heights above sea level for this race. Remember, when we were busy going through the analysis of our route map, I explained what is happening, right? If the height above sea level is 1,400 meters when we're starting the race, okay, it's 1,400 meters when we're starting the race. But as we're basically continuing along this route, it increases from the start to the 5 kilometer distance. What does that mean? That means that it's increasing in slope. Okay, it's a bit steep. You'll feel it on your potries and your thighs as you're busy running there. Okay, it's a steep slope. Okay, so I've basically explained what is happening. The height above sea level, if it's increasing, it means that it's going like this. If it decreases, then it means that our slope is decreasing like this. Okay, so that's just something that you need to basically take note of. Consider the height above sea level for this race. A, explain why a runner was correct when he stated that he was running uphill from the start to the 10-kilometer mark. So we need to explain why a runner was saying that, from the start to the 10-kilometer mark, I was running uphill. Why would we say that that runner was correct? So let's just look for the 10-kilometer mark here. From the start to the 10-kilometer mark, what are we seeing? Do we see that from the start, the height was 1,400? At the 10-kilometer mark, what was the height? The height was 1,708 meters. So what are we seeing there? Okay, if at the start maybe the height above sea level is 1,400 meters, and then when we get to the 10-kilometer mark, it increases, the height has increased, then it basically means that, okay, there was an increase in the slope, right? Because let's just say this is our sea level. Okay, so this is our sea level. Maybe they tell us the height above sea level. Okay, it's like maybe they just say this is 1,400, right? And then from there, height above sea level is 1,700. Do you see that now? The slope is increasing. Do you see that? Okay, so then that is why the runner was correct when he stated that they would be moving uphill at that point there. Okay, so the runner is correct. because we noticed that the height above sea level increases from the start to the 10-kilometer mark. Okay, so the height above sea level from the start to the 10-kilometer mark increases. So at the start, we saw that the height above sea level is 1,400 meters, and then at the 10-kilometer mark, the height is 1,708 meters. All right, cool. Let's have a look at B. Express in the form 1:2 something, the lowest possible height above sea level to the highest height above sea level. All right, so we can see here that we're actually given a ratios question. Also, all the time with these ratio questions, they tell you how you need to set up your question. So all that you need to do at this point, you just need to establish what you need to focus on. All right, so they're telling us that it must be in the form of 1:2 something. All right, so that's already telling you how you need to set up your ratio. Then you want the lowest possible height above sea level to the highest possible height above sea level, right? So here, all that you need to do, you need to find the lowest height above sea level from this route and the highest height above sea level from this route, and then that's our starting point. Okay, so let's just do that. So what is our lowest possible height? So it is 1,004, 1,005, 1,007, 1,160, 1,166, 1,185. So I can already see that, the highest height above sea level, right? You can see that it's at 1,708. That's the highest, okay? And then the lowest, you can just see that it's that height of 1,166. Okay, so they want the ratio of the lowest possible height. Remember, I mentioned that if they say 2, it's your colon to the highest possible height. Okay, so what's the lowest possible height? It's 1,166 meters. To highest possible height, 1,708 meters. We want it to be in the form of 1:2 something. So to get it in the form of 1:2 something, you just need to divide by 1,166 meters on the left hand side. What you do on the left hand side, you also need to do on the right hand side. So you're also going to divide that by 1,166 meters. So therefore you'll have 1:1. If you round it off to 2 decimal places, 1.4648 3705. So we can also just leave it as 1.46. Yeah, okay, remember here they didn't really specify that should we leave it in simplified ratio form or in unit form. Remember, if they ask us to leave it in simplified ratio form, it basically means that we need to have our ratio as whole numbers, né? It needs to be as whole numbers. We cannot have our ratio as fractions. But if they say unit form, okay, then that basically means that you can leave it as a fraction, you can leave it as a like a decimal fraction and things like that. Okay, but here they didn't specify, so we can leave it in whatever way that we want to leave it in. Okay, so we're done. Question 3.4. Explain why there are cut-off times for a marathon. Okay, so all the time, right, if you're given a question where you just need to give your own opinion based on what's happening there, right, just try to give an answer that is reasonable. Why would they actually give cutoff times that at this time in 4 hours and 15 minutes, if you're not cut off number 1, then you can't continue with the race? Why would they do that? Okay, if you're not at the cut off 2 in 5 hours 15 minutes, we're gonna cut you off. If you're not at the finish line in 7 hours after starting a race, why would they do that? Obviously, guys, if they don't put these cutoff times, that means that now, everyone that is basically taking place, the organizers, will now have to sit there waiting for everyone to finish. Meaning that if someone is going to be taking 15 hours, now we must all be there waiting for 15 hours for that last person to finish. That means that now we're going to finish the race late, in times that are not safe, right? So it's very important for us to obviously, or for a marathon, to have a cut-off time. Okay, because if we didn't have cut-off times, that basically means that we have to wait until every runner is done to end the race. And honestly speaking, that is not reasonable. Okay, so it's just to ensure that obviously runners are not running at night, all right? And you can just make sure that all the runners are finishing at a reasonable time. Okay, so that's basically my reasoning behind it. Okay, to ensure that the runners are finishing at a reasonable time. Okay, last question, question 3.5. It is the last question. It says that for the half marathon, for the half marathon, a runner must cover a distance of 16.5 kilometers in a time of 5 hours from the start of the race to beat the cut-off time for the half marathon. Okay, a runner of the full marathon compared his speed with the speed of a half marathon runner and stated that he had to run at 2.7 kilometers per hour faster in order to beat the cut-off time of the full marathon. Okay, verify showing all calculations whether he is correct. You may use the formula. Okay, so this is basically, one of those, higher level questions. Okay, so if you are a learner that gets distinctions, this is where you're obviously, when you're answering these questions, you're not leaving them blank. This is where you're getting your distinctions. Okay, so now when we're answering this question, we need to basically understand, right, what is actually happening here. What is actually happening here, right? So we basically given, like, here information about the half marathon. Okay, so they're telling us that the half marathon, the distance that must be covered is 16.5 kilometers at a time of 5 hours. Okay, so if we given distance and we given time, that basically means that that information is gonna help us determine what is the speed of this runner. Okay, roughly on average, what is the speed that this runner must run in, okay, to be able to reach the cut off time in time. Okay, right? And then they're telling us that the runner of the full marathon compared his speed, right, with the speed of a half marathon runner and stated that he had to run 2.7 kilometers faster in order to beat the cut-off time of the full marathon. So this runner of the full marathon, right, is basically stating that he needs to run at a speed of 2.7 kilometers faster than the speed of the half marathon runner in order to beat the cut-off time of the marathon. So when you're given such things where you are basically told that he needs to run at a speed of this more or faster, it basically means that we first need to determine, if he's saying faster, that means that we first need to determine what is the speed of the half marathon runner. I'm gonna put X there. We need to determine the half marathon runner's speed and then add it with 2.7 kilometers per hour, or the speed of the full marathon runner, to then determine what is the speed that he's claiming, that he needs to run. Okay, so that's the first thing. So we need to first find out what is the speed of the half marathon runner. We need to get that. After getting that, we're going to add that to that 2.7 kilometers. And then we're going to get, okay, that means that he needs to run at this speed. Then we're going to check now. Okay, then we're going to check what is the actual speed that this runner is running, because obviously they've given us information that it's a full marathon. Okay, he needs to basically reach or beat the cut-off time. So for the cut-off time, what's the distance, what's the time, and then check to see if it actually correlates with this statement that he's basically saying there. So it's a bit complex, but it's not that bad as long as you know where you need to start. So I'm going to take it step by step. Okay, so he's claiming, so this is question, let me just do this. This is question 3.5, okay? He's claiming he had to run 2.7 kilometers per hour faster than, the speed of the half marathon runner. So we don't know what that speed is. So that's why I'm putting an X there. That is what he's claiming. So to start off this question, we need to determine the speed of the half marathon runner. So obviously we're given, an equation that we can use here. So we can just say for us to get speed, right, we just need to divide both sides by time, okay? And then speed is equal to distance over time. Or if you've basically have been watching my video tutorials where I've been explaining, this triangle, you can just now use this triangle for yourself. Remember here, they're telling us it's speed multiplied by time. So what does that mean? It's going to be speed at the bottom multiplied by time, and then this is basically going to give us what? Speed multiplied by time. So we've already dealt with these two. That means that your distance is supposed to be at the top, right? So we can just basically use this triangle to help us now calculate, the speed. So according to this triangle, what do we see here? To get the speed is equal to distance. Remember, value at the top, value at the bottom basically means that we divide. Okay, so I'm just gonna write there that to get the average speed of the half marathon runner, it's going to be equal to distance over time. So what is the distance that the half marathon runner travels? Is 16.5 kilometers. What is the time? They mentioned that it's 5 hours. Okay, so 16.5 divided by 5 is equal to 3.3 kilometers per hour. So this is the average speed that the half marathon runner is running. So it's 3.3 kilometers per hour. So what does this mean? It basically means that from his statement here, right, he's claiming that he had to run 2.7 kilometers per hour plus 3.3 kilometers per hour. We found this X. Okay, so meaning that he was claiming that he actually had to run how many kilometers per hour? So it's 2.7 plus 3.3. He's claiming that he had to actually run 6 kilometers per hour. So we've now sorted out the first aspect when it comes to this question, right? That he had to actually run 6 kilometers per hour. So what do we need to do now? We need to check if he did in fact run 6 kilometers per hour. What are we going to use to help us determine if he did in fact run 6 kilometers per hour? We're going to use the full marathon cut off 2 information, okay? Because this is the time that he needs to beat at this distance to not be cut off. So that's what we're going to be using. We're going to be using the distance of 31.5 kilometers per hour, as well as the time of 5 hours and 15 minutes to determine his average speed. And his average speed needs to be maybe that's 6 kilometers per hour or more. Okay, so let's check. Okay, so now we want to determine the speed of the full marathon runner. Remember, we already know how to calculate average speed at this point. We're just going to use the triangle. I don't have to explain that again. So all that we need to do now, we are just going to take the average speed, okay, is equal to distance over time. So if you haven't been skipping any of my video tutorials, you know at this point what we need to do, okay? Because remember, we were given that the distance, I'm just going to write it there, the distance is equal to, for the full marathon, it is 31.5 kilometers, and the time is equal to 5 hours and 15 minutes. So at this point, you already need to know what needs to happen. You already need to see what is the issue here, right? We're given time in units of hours and minutes, okay? So we know that I explained that the units for distance must always be in kilometers. Unit for time must always be in hours. Unit for average speed It must always be in kilometers per hour. So we can see that now before we can substitute, these values into this formula, we first need to convert, these units for time because they're a problem. Okay, we can't have hours and minutes. So what do we need to do? So we already know that we've got 5 hours, so that's fine. We don't need to convert that. We just need to convert those, 15 minutes into hours. So how do we convert minutes to hours? So we know that 1 hour is equal to 60 minutes. Remember, we just create these equations for ourselves because it just makes it easy when it comes to conversions. I did mention that if you have an equation that you can work with, right, that relates to quantities, okay, it makes it easy to just multiply by what you want, divide by what you have. So in this case, we're going to have 15 minutes. We're going to just multiply by what we want. We want our units to be in hours, so 1 hour divided by 60 minutes. Other students can just see that you can just immediately divide by 60 minutes. Remember, don't tell me that, guys, I'm using the long way. I'm using the long way around for a particular reason because I'm trying to cater to all learners that are watching my video tutorials, okay? So if you take 15 minutes divided by 6, you see that that's great, guys, okay? But some learners don't see that. So 15 multiplied by 1 over 60, what do you need to do? Or what do you get? It's 0.25 hours, right? 0.25 hours. So then what do you need to do here? We are just going to find or conclude that our time is actually equal to 5 hours plus 0.25 hours. So that's easy. It's just 5.25 hours. So now we're ready to substitute into this equation. So the distance, it's set 31,5 kilometers divided by what is the time? Our time is 5.25 hours. Then if you substitute that or punch it into your calculator, you get 6 hours, which is what we wanted. Okay, so we can basically see that his statement is actually correct. He actually does need to run at 2.7 kilometers faster than the half marathon runner in order to beat the cut-off 2 time of the full marathon. So if you didn't get the point of what was happening in question 3.5, I suggest that you just watch it again, right? Listen to what I'm saying. What is happening? Okay, how can you start off with the approach to this question? If it's not clicking, then it's okay, guys, right? It's fine, right? But at this point, I think I did. Okay, so I've explained, everything for you guys in detail, how you need to approach these questions. Okay, also if you're a learner that struggles with focusing on what you need to do, just highlight keywords. Highlight if they're giving you this, giving you that, just try to see if I just calculate average speed from there, what is that telling me? Okay, if you can just highlight keywords, I think that will help you just center your mind or focus your mind on what you basically need to do to approach this question. So I think I'm done, guys, with analyzing these maps. We've gone through your regional maps, your provincial maps. We've gone through working with different types of scales, right? So I think we're well equipped when it comes to what we need to do when we're analyzing our maps. The only thing that I haven't done in these revision videos, it's your layout plans, it's your elevation plans. That's the only thing that I haven't done, as well as just strip charts. Okay, that's the only maps that I really haven't gone through, and your elevation maps. So please just take this time to go through my channel and look at a video tutorial where we've gone through a strip chart and see what is basically needed from you when it comes to analyzing that. Okay, so I think this is where we're going to stop this video tutorial. Thank you so much for making it this far. Okay, please just say Jelly Tots if you made it to the end, and I'll see you guys in the next video tutorial.
That is it, guys, and I'll see you guys on my next upload, Distance Learning with Lee, where I make learning mathematics super easy. Bye, guys.